Welcome, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here, and we are continuing with our Hearts of Iron 3's Black Ice 11.2, and we're playing as the U.S.A, which I think is important at this time in world events now, much more so than I did before. Day or so. Let's click up to speed. We'll have a deficit there. Good. We'll have to do this. Okay, molybdenum. With Venezuela, not a chance. Okay, artillery unit training events. Artillery unit training. Artillery unit training, 1939. We do not, in any of these, really need to push sooner than we would normally or most efficiently research those. Some of these others, there are reasons to push a little ahead, but we're also going to just try to catch up on a few. Now, I have been asked, am I producing enough industry for when the war hits? Because our base right now is 175 ICs, as it says, and that is unadjusted by various factors, which are listed there. Our available is 290. And my simple answer is, I don't know if we have enough ICs. I have not played America before. I do believe that there will be modifiers that will, get rid of or boost up our ICs. There may be events that will give us more ICs, but we are going to build even more ICs. Now, also, what I was asked, why do I build heavy ICs? Well, as Germany, you can't. Now, okay, and I looked at the stats for these heavy ICs. They only really start to become worth it if you have 4 ICs, because they only affect the ICs in the province. They are a modifier. They cost the same amount as regular ICs, but take twice as long to build them, I believe is what it was. So meaning like the daily cost is the same, but take twice as long. So they end up costing twice as many ICs. But they modify the base ICs by 2.5. They just modified it by 2, well, it's about the same thing. But that 0.5 is once you get more than 4 ICs in a particular province, it starts to become worth making these. So they are a modifier to it. So don't really, unless you plan for some reason to max this particular one out, don't run around and put heavy ICs in places where there are very few. But we can start to build up some more concentrations of ICs to then later see about putting in the ICs as well. Higgins a little better. Okay, these have just deployed theirs, so we will do 1 and 1. A lot of the industry back here. I know I've done a few of these already a few times. Okay, well, let's move all of these to the top. Now, of course, we've got to do a lot of upgrades and whatnot. Okay. Obviously, let's see. Obviously, the number of ICs matters, but also 1,265 days to build command battleship. Um, South class. I don't know the difference between these. We could look at some of their stats for sure. Looks the same. Those stats look very similar, so I don't know why I would be building one of those particular. We're looking at 25 ICs, 20 ICs. A long time to get them. These are much cheaper. These are the CVLs. The CVLs in the U.S. service, basically, I believe, all came off of the same holes. They came off of the holes of the Cleveland class cruisers that were put into service. Sort of St. Louis may be a variant, I think. Yeah, St. Louis, I believe, is a pseudo class. Really, I think more of a Brooklyn class light cruiser. Torpedo boats should be good for the Philippines. Yeah, but I'm going to wait on all of those things that'll build fast. Those will build fast. What I'm looking at now is things that are going to take a while to build. And what we can do here is, I think we're going to put 3 of these. Partially, I want light carriers. These are fast light carriers. These aren't the escort carriers that were built on either cargo hull ships, or cargo ship hulls, or a few that were built on converted tanker hulls that they kept some of the fuel tanks in, but converted them to being escort carriers. They're slow. Where these are built on the Cleveland class hulls that had been started as Cleveland's, and we're going to not add CAGs. We're going to build CAGs later. These, I know I could do it by clicking at the 3, but that will put 3 of these in. Partially, well, let's see, Independence is the first one of the class. I'm doing those now because they'll be quicker to build, and they will, along with these, reduce or increase our practical, shall we say? So reduce time, build time of them and cost. So we'll get those into production now. See, these here would only be ready in February 41. So we've got to get more of our other ships in production soon. Yeah, because it's around now, I think, they start the massive Cleveland class building 20 or more light cruisers. So yeah, I don't know if we're building enough ICs. Also, I do know we are down heavily on energy. I mean, we sort of symbolized by coal, and a lot of it was coal driven in America, but also a lot of hydroelectric. And I don't think the U.S. is having that big of an energy problem. I'm not sure though, but maybe armored designs. heavy tanks, which I don't know when or if we're going to get to building heavy tanks. We might. Look at some of our technologies here. Superchargers for aircraft. I think it's yes, one and done. That's all of our 38 technologies. Being researched, so let's go back and see what we can do to improve this. Now crew training. The air interception tactics and decryption. Okay, yeah, stop that. No. See what we can also do down here. Yeah, ground attack tactics can be useful. Okay, Chile would like a submarine. All right, Chile. Panama, okay, cancelled. Yes, the Dominican Republic can have oil and they can have metal. Okay, well. So I am worried about this here long term. We just deployed a bunch of coal. These have multiples. It'll take a while to grind that down, but not forever. Trying to see if there's something that is affecting it. Okay, well. Let's do that. Cruisers, 8-inch gun cruisers. Big. Some of these things. Okay, base 8. That is the Brooklyn class. So, okay, those are all, okay, these are the Brooklyn class. So that's just some of them. Cleveland class. No, 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 not Italy. Okay. Yes, you can have crude oil. Okay. No, we let that continue. Okay, the Ma click is no more. And so now we have a mostly peaceful China under Japanese administration. They have direct control in this game of the coastal regions, which means the industry and resources here they will, if they keep revolt risk down, will have better resources. I would change that to be in direct control where they do things now, because it's just on the border there. Well, yeah, that will get Japan to be a more viable opponent to us in the looming Pacific War. Single engine armament research advance. Well, let's get now I want to talk a little about Japan and World War II and how it relates to Russia today. Russia today. Have y'all heard we're at war with Russia? That was from the majority leader, Steny Hoyer, in the U.S. Congress within the last couple of days, or words very close to that effect, he said, in the U.S. Congress at the podium. So that is an official statement. Now, of course, and he's in the House of Representatives, just to be specific, not the Senate. Now, of course, the House of Representatives has no authority to declare war, let alone has there been a vote to declare war. It is just the Senate that it gets to declare war. Even the president can't declare war. It is the Senate of the United States that can declare war. And the last time the Senate of the United States declared war was on Germany. It had originally declared war on Japan, and then Germany declares war on the U.S., and then they declare on Germany. That, to my knowledge, is the last time. Oh, there may be something declared on something pre-45 that was declared on, an Axis minor power or something. I don't know. But this is dangerous times, folks. Dangerous times. When U.S. political leaders have gotten too used to being, quote unquote, even though they haven't been, as I just said, at war with somebody. They think that what has been happening in Afghanistan and Iraq and Vietnam and Korea and many other little places is war for that. No, it is not. The last time we were at war, to the best of my knowledge, and I know a little bit about history, we, the United States, the last time we were at war was in 1945, and it was against Japan. They were the last significant nation. Again, like I said, there's some Axis minor that there. When America actually goes to war, it is a tremendous thing. And these people have forgotten it, and their rhetoric is dangerous. It's even dangerous. I mean, it's more dangerous because of nuclear weapons, but it's dangerous with I mean, it's dangerous in World War II. Now, Japan in the 1920s and 1930s looked around the world and saw every great nation that it could identify is a nation that has an empire. It did not see a great nation that didn't have an empire. And it did not want to be a minor nation, so it felt it needed an empire to compete. And of course, all the empires, because it didn't see China as an empire at that point, or as a great nation at that point. I should say it was an empire, and it saw it as an empire, but didn't see it as a great nation. So all the great empires were, as it would see it, European based. Obviously, there's the United States, but even then, it depends on how much of a great nation did it see it as. How relevant did it see the United States? So it felt it needed an empire. That's why it takes Korea. That's why it takes Taiwan fairly early on. I don't know the dates on those. But in the 20s and 30s, the sort of place where it thought an empire could grow was China. Because going after the Philippines, going after Indochina, going after the Dutch East Indies, going after whatever British possessions, or Russia, the Soviets' possessions, would lead to wars with a great empire, a great power. And so it looked to China. Now it knew, rightly so, it could not conquer China. I mean, obviously in this game it has, and in this game, and I know periodically whenever it goes, I'm out, Japan conquers China too easy, this is unrealistic. Well, again, everything that they've been able to do, look at, they even tried, the Black Ice people tried to create a second Japan, sort of Manchukuo and Korea-based, to fight the war in China and keep Japan sort of at peace with China for a long time, to sort of have two Japans for the AI, that is. So that Japan islands would focus on building up a navy and being ready to fight the Pacific War, while this other land-based one fights the Asia War, if you will. And nothing's worked. So the AI, it cannot be taught, isn't smart enough to realize, only put so much resources into the fight in China. Everything else should go into the fight that's coming other places. So it doesn't do it well, handle it well. So that's why to have something like a historical thing later on, because otherwise you'll have Japan will move and they make these garrison units super heavy now, mainly because of Japan in their transportation lift, so that they cannot be moved by sea. So all the garrison units on all these islands don't get moved to China, and they stay there. So what would happen is Japan will move every mobile ground unit that it can in to fight the war in China, and then it declares war against everybody else. And yeah, they'll script the Black Ice people as scripted, invasions that, yes, magically create units, but in a way they're sort of pre-existing units that were back in Japan, but if they let them come on the map, they just end up being put into the fight into China and whatnot. So yeah, they'd have these forces here that would be scripted to land and do some stuff, and then sometimes can turn out all right. But once it's that scripted, oh well, the U.S. could just simply sail into here, land troops, take Tokyo, and march around Japan. I mean, it's literally that easy. So they're trying to make it harder to just defeat an undefended Japanese home islands. So yeah, that is unrealistic. But so Japan knew it could not conquer China. But and now this is a big area, Manchukuo, but it is something of an empty area, particularly back then. I think it's more populated now, more densely populated now than it was then, but I'm not sure. A lot of industry has continued to be built up here, and there was basically, not entirely none, but basically no industry when Japan really sort of starts in here. And they start with a minor amount of industrial development in, finished goods, producing stuff, but mostly it's industry in mining and getting resources and refining the resources. You want to take iron ore, turn it into pure iron, and then turn it into steel. You want to do these things, and then normally shipping it off to Japan to make things out of steel. But there was some local industry. China, and I believe Norinco, particularly in the company, has massively, during the Chinese communist era, has massively industrialized this area, which will have attracted and grown the population. So although that was big, a lot of these other areas were much more densely populated, much more industrialized. Japan knows it can't take it all. It wants to take it in bite-sized pieces. And how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Okay, well, that's how they wanted to eat the elephant of China. Who knows what it would have been in the long run, in 100 years. What, if Japan's empire had never faltered, what would it be today, instead of 1920 at 2020? What, would they have, occupied way back to here? Would it have been direct rule, is basically my understanding, is direct rule in Taiwan and Korea? Or would it have been like Manchukuo as puppet states? I don't know. And things flow with history. They're not fixed. What meaning in the sense that what somebody writes down, the plan to take over China in 1920 or 1930 or in 1939 or whatever, somebody writes this, whether they're in power or just somebody in their basement writes this as the plan. That doesn't mean that that's how it would have happened, because things flow. Sometimes appetites get bigger. Well, China refused to surrender, and they were too big of a bite to eat, and they kept getting foreign support. Prior to the proper outbreak of the Marco Polo Bridge, there was tons of skirmishes around this area, not specifically at the Marco Polo Bridge, but there were tons of skirmishes. There was ongoing lots of skirmishes here, because part of the reason there were skirmishes is there were border patrols, but there's no freaking border. There's no fence or some sort of demarcated line. It was more of a conceptual line that was drawn on a map, and as you're right, because a lot of them were done on horse patrols. As you're riding around, and these are horse patrols by Manchukuo, horse patrols by Japan, horse patrols by, and I know this is the Meijing, the Japanese sort of puppet Mongolia, as that is sort of being set up and developed. Mongolian, which is, as we can see here, is a sort of a puppet of the Soviet Union, as well as basically nationalist Chinese horse patrols. They're all sort of going on and around these areas, and so they may even, to some degree, agree on where the border is on the map. But when the patrol is out here, they don't know where that border is. There's periodically they put markers, pillars or whatever down, but sometimes they move them. One side will go, here's the marker that they put them. Well, let's move it over to this other hill over here, and so that when they come back next week or next month, they'll see it's their pillar, but they won't realize that it's been moved, and will gain some territory. They were playing games like that, as well as some of them were more definable on the ground when you're there, because it's like follow the river, as we can see there. But others were ill-defined as to where the border is. So there's constant stuff going on here. There was some skirmishing going on in and around the Shanghai situation prior to it. And I don't know if you guys see where I'm going with all of this. Prior to the major outbreak, Germany had been the sort of primary military advisor and supplier of equipment. Now, it's never as effective as you would today think it was. I've read about, and you've seen some pictures, I'm sure if you've looked around, of normally the pictures of the Japanese capturing Panzer I tanks from the Chinese. Well, the Chinese were very disappointed in these Panzer Is. Well, why were they disappointed? Well, okay, the design ain't so great, but I don't know that the design was the problem. They show up and they get landed somewhere, I think probably around the Shanghai area, and then they get stuck in customs. Now they're importing them for the Japanese, for the Chinese army. They're stuck in customs. So they sit like for 6 months just outside, rusting. And the hatches are open, and so by the time they trying to get to the army and getting into the units, they're just not in good shape. They need significant work, and I don't know that they ever got the proper attention to get them properly running. Again, after this period of neglect and just sitting them outside for a while, and there's supposedly significant rust on them, the Chinese decide, partially because I think the guns are fucked up, but decide to put different machine guns into them instead of the MG-15. They don't have MG-34s. Panzer Is have MG-15s. They're not MG-34s. So they decide to put other machine guns in them. They run them, but they also get German aircraft, German artillery, some German anti-tank guns, the 37 millimeter anti-tank guns and things like that. They get that, and I know it's Division 88 and 2 or 3 other divisions are specifically German trained. You see photos often of them wearing German helmets. So they're German trained units. And those are pretty good. Most Division 88 is destroyed fighting in the defense of Nanjing as a proper military unit. I do see that there's a few people out there on Twitch and YouTube. Want to say hi? Love to know who's out there. Thanks. Watching according to the count numbers. So these units are, they're some of the better units in the Chinese Nationalist Army. Now, with the proper outbreak of the Marco Polo bridge incident and the war coming up, for a short while, Germans advisory team stays. There is lobbying prior to the Marco Polo Bridge incident and after the Marco Polo Bridge incident. Some of it is documented in Third Reich events by both the Chinese and the Japanese for German support. Ah, great. Arnaud's here and Butter My Pickle is here. Funny name. Yes, cool. Hi. And, you know, finance minister of like China, Japan, I forget. You got to play the mod or look at it. I'd have to look back at it, what I did. It was going back, meeting with Hitler from China and Japan. And they're trying to get trade. Germany's been doing a lot of trade, sending over finished goods, getting resources back that it needs from China. And that's all going on. And there had been, China goes to war for this in World War I. This had been the primary German concession. I believe there is still sort of a German, doing air quotes, village or town that's even Mao Zedong stayed at there that has sort of been kept as a historical sort of visiting center thing that's still German style buildings, German style this and that, sort of as a, you know, a historical theme park, if you will. But China, hey, everybody's going to war with Germany. We'll go to war too. We'll get this back. And I think there was a other minor concession or two that they attacked, but this was a major siege. Of course, Japan goes to war with Germany for basically all of this out here. It wanted to get this, but Australia ends up getting this. But it gets these sort of islands out here. And that's why they go. That's why both these powers enter World War One. Yes, there is a major siege. Germans fight. I don't know how long. It's a serious siege attempt. Germans fight hard for it. Know that it's going to be lost, but still fight. Not fight to the last man or anything crazy like that. Just fight until, you know, defense becomes impractical, as far as I believe. Japan, yes, picks up some of these islands. China sends thousands, maybe even tens of thousands, like 20 or 30,000 troops to Europe. But I don't even think they pretended that they were going to be fighting troops. They were used as labor, you know, loading and unloading trains or other, you know, ships and other sort of things, which were very vital. You know, they needed that work done. And trying to organize the, you know, a division or two of Chinese soldiers into the front line somewhere in World War I is probably not that practical. So labor divisions would be much more useful. Japan, a little bit more naval commitment into the Mediterranean. I think they dealt with or were dealing with some submarines from the Austrians. I don't remember, but yeah, little bits going on there. So, but even though they want to get this back, there has been, including, you know, before the Hitler era, rather friendly relations between China and Germany. But Hitler and a few other ideologists in the Nazi Party, see Japan as a kindred spirit with the sort of Bushido and war and whatnot. And China and Japan are highly racist countries to this day. Don't think not. I would say mostly not in the, you know, like wanting to put on a hood and march around because they hate somebody. They're just racist and thinking they're better than certain groups of people out there. And I don't want to put words in their mouths. So you can look at some of the YouTube videos on some of this stuff about their types of racism. But Japan, particularly in the 30s and definitely into the you know, early 40s during the war, I've read some of their accounts of, you know, stuff. Becomes virulently racist, and it's racist against Chinese and other Asian peoples. It isn't based on like skin color, just because you're darker or lighter or skin color. No, and they have some weird ideology and going on in there, so they develop more and more of that now. And so they're both sort of competing for Germans' attention. Japan wins out mostly on Nazi ideological grounds. I don't know if I'm not going to bring it up here or whatever, but a photo of one of the Yes. Okay, I know. The photo of Germany's evacuation, I think, from one of these cities back in here. Um, Maybe, I don't know, was it Wuhan? I don't know. Have you heard of Wuhan recently? Did something may have happened there? I don't know. Just got demonetized, I'm sure. Uh, of the train, and sort of an overhead view. I don't know what they were standing on, but it's fairly high up, maybe some sort of tower or something. Um, of the sort of last major evacuation of the German delegation, legation, whatever, including the training forces, um, that were going to head, I think, out to Shanghai, but through fairly war-torn China. And they have one of the train cars has basically a train car long Nazi flag. You know, the center the center of the flag is as wide as the train car and it's big red to sort of say to the Japanese, don't strafe us or bomb us as we're traveling across um, China to get out. And that is the end. I forget what year it is. I'm not sure if it's before or after the Battle of Nanking. I don't remember. Sorry. Again, we're talking about lessons from history as opposed to historical lessons. Now, I know I've gone off on a tangent, but I'm going to continue. Hopefully, it's interesting instead of gameplay. We'll get to gameplay. Don't worry. And so they leave. Now, it is of interest, including Europe, who likes to the idea of having China be some sort of political entity, but they want to carve up spheres of influence slash trading spheres in China. You know, like this is the French area, this is the British, and this is the Japanese. You know, where the main trading is. You know, so exclusive trading zones they want to have. America, on the other hand, wants China to be open to trade, but they wanted to everybody compete, and it's an ideological thing, not just. I do fervently believe, because I know American ideology, fervently believe that it isn't just because they were some of the later ones to the party and didn't have an area, because we can see how they work with Japan and opening Japan up. It isn't set up to be an American exclusive zone, to the point that when Japan really starts building up its navy, they're looking to Britain, not to America, for naval building expertise. So America ideologically wants Asia to be open to trade, particularly with the rest of the world, instead of having them be closed autarky. Here, you know, like we can see as an extreme example, of course, is North Korea. America doesn't like that concept. But they don't want to necessarily say, oh, well, this is our exclusive trading zone. No, it's everybody's. Just open it up and let us trade. The Yankee trader ideology. So, yeah. So everybody wants to do this. And the other European powers want to keep their trading zones that they have, their influence areas, and are worried about generally Japanese aggression, because they can go back to 1900 and the war with Imperial Russia, and not just gobbling up some unoccupied European zones. So they start, especially down through here, moving in supplies to keep China fighting. China had several arsenals building rifles, machine guns, including a copy of the Maxim machine gun. One arsenal is making a copy of, I believe they're making a 1911, but they're definitely making a copy of the Thompson submachine gun, but it's called a Thompson. They put an A instead of an O in the THAM. I don't know why they do that, if they just don't recognize the difference between an A and an O. But they're making they're making their own weapons to some degree, not enough to fight the Japanese, but so they're importing a lot of weaponry as well, and that keeps them going. then as Japan is clearing up more and more of the coastline, cutting off. Oh yes, they made copies of the C-96, mostly in 30 cal Mauser. I don't know if they did 9mm. I just don't know for sure. I know modern they made a bunch for, or converted a bunch for import into the U.S., but they did also make it in 45 ACP butter. Those are very rare and very valuable. People like to get them. Big 45 ACP C96. They make copies of the little it's like the 1900 Browning and the 1903 or whatever, and they're sort of pseudo copies in that they're not exactly, definitely not parts compatible, but not exactly, down to a particular Browning pistol, but that sort of base style on it. They're making I think it's more of a Mauser 1888 type rifle, that they're making Maxims, like I said. So the Maxim machine gun is fairly sophisticated. Now, I don't think the build quality is good as, a British or German or even Russian Maxim build quality, but they're functional, and so they're functionally good where they need to be. So yeah, they're making small arms. They're making some large arms like artillery pieces, but not much. So they have an arms industry, but it's just nowhere near what you need to mobilize Chinese armies, and nowhere near as sophisticated weapons as the Japanese. And they're very few, like Division 88. It is sort of the title. I call it that because D88 is, and they use the European letter D and then 88 in a frame as the divisional symbol. I know that that was sort of the premier trained German division. There were two or three others. They were basically German trained and equipped divisions, and they're supposedly fairly good, but Japan just overwhelms them in the Battle of Nanjing area, or leading up to it. Somewhere in this vicinity, they get destroyed as a formation. So yeah, they're good. I mean, they have some of that, but they can't make enough to keep their warfare going. And yes, at times they do move these arsenals, disassemble them, and get them out of the Japanese path of expansion and reassemble them, deep inside of China as the war goes on. But it's nowhere near enough to keep them going. But even with that, they might not have surrendered, just knowing that Japan cannot effectively occupy all of the territory to defeat them. But Europe is pushing, keeping them going in. And as they keep coming down here, Europe is losing more and more contact, and to the point that up until 1941, Hong Kong is in British territory. December, the Shanghai International Zone still exists. Lots of Jews are fleeing to there because you don't need an entry visa to come into the international quarter in Shanghai. And they get to continue to exist and import-export things. But if you were to bring in a bunch of arms, they're not going to let them be put on a train and sent, because this area internally gets controlled by Japan. So anything leaving the international zones or anything leaving Hong Kong and going into the mainland is going to be inspected by Japanese inspectors, or from Macau or wherever, or down here. I don't know much about this Xi'an, just how big that was. I really just don't know. I should look that up sometime. So you can no longer bring in arms through Hong Kong. You can bring in, I don't know what, tea from India or whatever that Japan will allow in. And Japan wants some levels of trading to continue until it goes to war with the Western powers. But you can't bring arms through here into China. For a while, they would start bringing them in through Indochina, just looking for my words as to what to call this. Until, of course, 1940 comes along and Japan occupies this. So it sort of the Burma Road becomes the only lifeline in. And as Burma Road is the only lifeline in, is when they effectively turn to America for support. This is, as a and this is in 1941. Only in 1941 do they start really turning to America for support, and it's mostly, Britain is supporting this for a while, but they then get into their little war with the Germans, so they can't really support it too much. But there is still a trickle of supplies coming through, and America wants to supply them. So they're sending supplies in and sending in volunteers. Now, I know I talked last weekend about this, but these volunteers were, there are literally Chenault and I think other individuals. Chenault is still a reservist I believe he's still a reservist in the American Air Corps. He might have officially resigned for that. I don't. He's brought back eventually as a member of the American Air Corps. But Chenault and others are literally going around with the permission of the government, not so much the permission of the Air Force or the Air Corps at the time, but more permission from FDR and crew to go around to American air bases and say, hey, we'll give you a signing bonus plus I think it's $100 per, or is it $1,000? I don't know, which is a lot of money. If it's $1,000, I forget what, but I think it's just $100 per airplane you shoot down. We'll give it to you, and so it's a little bit. It's doing good, doing the good thing and fighting the good fight. But a lot of it is actually getting to fight, getting to fly aircraft in combat. And sort of mercenary of getting well paid for it to go around to active duty Army Air Corps pilots, as well as some ground crew to keep the aircraft going. And these people can immediately resign their commissions and leave the U.S. Army Air Corps with no penalties. No penalties. So that's, so it's, they're getting out there to go fight. So these are, active duty U.S. pilots that are technically leaving American service and entering Chinese service and putting on Chinese uniforms. And that's what they do. They wear Chinese uniforms. And to come into fight there. And the P-40 is their fighters. Fighters, again, that I know I mentioned, had been built to go to fight, give to the British or sell to the British as part of Lend-Lease. But the British are less interested in them now. They're going, we don't need these. They're still getting some Brewster Buffaloes that they don't want anymore. So they send them down to Shanghai. A bunch of the Brewster Buffaloes are given over to the Dutch here. It's just sort of like, well, what do we do with these things? They're sort of outclassed by the latest, Messerschmitts or whatever. We don't really need them. So they decide to give some of the older models that are thought to be effective against the Japanese Zero to the Chinese. So they're giving all this stuff over to China to keep China in the war. And actually, I skipped one major player. Sorry. Rewind a bit. After Germany leaves, yes, like I said, there was still a lot of incoming support through here. But as this is also drying up, the Soviets come in. I forgot about, I didn't totally forget, but I forgot about, but I didn't mention. The Soviets come in, and they start supplying. Well, remember that the Soviets had been supplying until just sort of the beginning of 1939 into Spain. Well, that's about the time that is winding up, is when they start supplying into China. Basically, late 39 into 1940. Again, as this is drying up, they're able to bring supplies across via railway into China. They're bringing the T-26 light tank in. They're bringing in various Soviet fighter models and Soviet pilots wearing Chinese uniforms and ground crew and whatnot. And so they're supplying, and until the last days of World War II, Stalin's policy had always been to support the nationalists. The nationalists, if you look in the 1920s particularly, are a radical revolutionary movement. And they're radically anti-Western. By the time 1930 rolls around, they become less anti-Western in their practices and rhetoric, but they're still something of a radical movement. Stalin always favors them over the communists in China, I think partially because he doesn't control the Communist Party in China, where he controls much of the communist parties in other countries, but he favors nationalist China, not communist China. And so he's putting the pilots in. That, of course, in summer of 41, dries up because Germany, Soviets get, lots of equipment, absolutely, lots of equipment, but the big flashy things are the fighters and the tanks. Dries up because the Germans invade the Soviet Union. So the Soviets basically, they leave the aircraft and whatnot because they're working to train Chinese pilots. They're working to train up Chinese units. They sort of leave all their equipment because it isn't really worth them hauling it out. But they pull all their personnel out and stop sending any supplies. And that is, again, in 41, with the start of the German invasion, this is why they're bringing in Americans, is because the Soviet training program disappears. The Soviet pilot program disappears. China realizes it's getting no more tanks from the Soviet Union. So that's, again, and you have just that blip of, and we'll get there, a sort of, Chenault and the Flying Tigers is sort of a mercenary organization because America enters the war. And you see this, and this is what keeps China alive, is a few experts, a few technical people, some trainers, whatnot, keeping this maybe you would call it a proxy war. Proxy wars sort of technically are something like, is Vietnam a proxy war? No. Okay, what's a good proxy war? Oh, well, the Arab-Israeli wars. The U.S. is sort of like supplying the Israelis. The Soviets are supplying the Egyptians, and then they go and fight. That's sort of a proxy war. You have like Vietnam or Afghanistan. You have one side as a proxy, the other side as the main player. Obviously the Soviets in Afghanistan and the U.S. in Vietnam. And that's sort of what you have here. I don't know exactly how you want to categorize that as a proxy war or direct confrontation, but you have that going. And, so you've switched from German to sort of European to Soviet to American support for China to keep this war going on. Keep China in the fight. A fight that Japan can't win. A fight that, to try to modify Chinese behavior, is the primary stated goal. You have first a steel embargo from the U.S., and the U.S. is pressuring other nations to go along with the steel embargo, plus, as war breaks out in Europe, the European powers need their own steel. They don't have extra steel to sell. And then oil. Also, the U.S. is embargoing oil, pressuring Latin America not to sell oil. And like I said before, the Dutch East Indies are in essence a puppet state of Britain. They're still run and administered by the Dutch here, but it's now become sort of a British puppet state. And they control a lot of oil. The British control a little bit of oil here. And they're not terribly happy with Japan, so they don't really want to sell either. Plus, they'd rather, sort of use it for their own needs. Not that they can necessarily use it all, because a lot of it's sitting out here and they need it here, and sometimes it's just easier to get it from here over to here, than going halfway around the world, just get it from Texas or someplace. So they sort of go along with the oil embargo. So you're cutting off Japan from international trade, particularly on critical materials, and you're supplying just a handful. It really doesn't matter as to the overall outcome of the war. A handful of active fighters, but really you're supplying the other side with effective supply to keep them in the fight. Japan is feeling this pinch, and it believes, wrongly of course it turns out, but it believes that if it could defeat militarily, locally, the European powers, particularly the last one left, of course, is Britain, and the United States, defeat those two powers, it could demand the stop of supporting of the Chinese, and to demand whether territorial concessions down here, probably they would want to keep that oil if they've won, and demand the ability to buy American steel. Probably at that point, we'll return the Philippines, we'll return Singapore and Malaya, and yeah, sure, we'll return Sumatra and Java and a few of these other places, but oh boy, Borneo, well, we need to keep that because, again, as we can see here, oil, just some direct control of oil. We'll keep that, but we'll give you the back, a lot of the rest of it you can all have back. I really believe they would have negotiated that back, partially looking at, and because they saw this through the eyes of their war with Imperial Russia, and that, yeah, they kept Port Arthur here from the Russians, but they, Russia still had Vladivostok. Russia still had, northern Sakhalin Islands. It wasn't like take everything. They didn't conquer everything either, but they did sink the fleet and prove that this was eventually doomed for the Russians. Japan would probably, in the long run, there have won. But, negotiate a settlement that's acceptable to Japan for its resources, to allow Japan and to have Japan have a free hand in China to fight its war there. That, I believe, is their war goals in going to war with the West. Now, they were entirely wrong with the idea that the West was willing to, because it wasn't willing to, Churchill and others wasn't willing to, and by that time the Soviet Union, once they're involved in the war, wasn't willing to allow a Nazi Germany, a fascist Italy, to continue to exist. The Western powers, I don't know how much they may or may not have put their hand on the scale, but they allowed the Italian monarchy to stay so long as there was a referendum on the Italian monarchy at some point after the war. I forget. I think it was 46. Someone can correct me now later. When the referendum on the Italian monarchy happens, well after the stop of the fighting, and it's really about a 50-50 vote. It's a very close vote. I don't even know if it goes over 1%. It's just slightly in favor of getting rid of the monarchy in Italy. So they were going to allow the Italian monarchy to remain, but the fascists were gone. Had to totally go, and of course the Nazis totally go from Germany, and Tojo and crew totally go from Japan, and basically Japan, like the other powers, gets to become, because Germany obviously is a divided puppet state. Italy is a bit of a puppet state for quite a while, but it's not divided. Japan is functionally a MacArthur puppet state of America. Allows the Japanese emperor to remain, but puts it back on a democratic path for governance. It is still an empire, because it has an emperor, or Showa, or whatever it's called. But if you look back at like 1935 or 34, there's a very liberal prime minister in Japan, disagrees with what the Japanese army is doing in Manchukuo. He's assassinated by the army. So the army assassinates a prime minister in Japan. And so it basically puts it back to that sort of Japan, a non-militarized state of Japan, shall we say, very much in multiple ways. So they were wrong about that. Okay, what does that have to do with why I think this is important to interrupt our, I'm going to have to label this episode. Putin, and I forget who, a very good documentary or a very good analysis of Russian strategic thinking, particularly regarding Ukraine, especially, and it isn't so much NATO on the border of Russia, which it already is on the border of Russia and has sort of been with Finland, but not really. Finland's coming in, though. Miscalculation there. But it's really sort of, what is it, border right along like this here, It's really that even if this isn't NATO, this is a big intrusion strategically into Russian territory. It talks about it. This is very fascinating because, if you remember, there were some generals that wanted to pull back either to a line sort of like this or a line sort of like this after the failure to take Moscow, maybe even sort of more with Narva, pull back to here to where it's sort of a narrow front instead of trying to hold deep into here. And then at that point, reorganize the German armed forces to get ready for more, charging deep into the Soviet Union once you're ready for it and to hold a sensible line. Well, you can sort of see that in this kind of thing, even if it is here, whether, puppet state, Belarus, we all know is a puppet state of Russia, and whether Ukraine was going to be Russia or be a puppet state, probably Putin's thinking was at least, the western half, western 2/3, sort of the Dnieper here and then up over to here. This might very well be a Ukraine puppet state with the back end over here and along the coast here being a direct Russian state. You can see it's a strategic, and this is why the army was going along with the invasion, because it saw this as a national threat, whether it's NATO or not. Because if it stays too long and becomes too firm, it's just cutting way too deep, so deep that we can go, how far back has it, ever since the, sort of Polish-Lithuanian big sort of super state here for a while. This territory has been Russia for so long, Russian controlled, that it is such a, Putin wants Russian Empire, Soviet Union in terms of borders. He sees those times through the rose-tinted glasses. Absolutely, I agree with that, Pickle. But so and you're right, Putin does see this, but it's not just Putin's dream. I'm sort of trying to point out that this Russian military thinkers that are in the army, not just somebody in their basement doing a YouTube video. I'm not in the basement. I can look out the window and see. I'm in an apartment building. But yeah, some guy in a basement writing. I'm talking, people in the Russian military establishment thinkers see this as a geographical threat that can penetrate in times of war deep into Russia, whatever it may be. So they want a more sensible border. And Putin, I think, would like to be thought of as another great Russian leader. Like you say, no, he's saying Soviet Union, not, I think, Warsaw Pact. I'm presuming he's being correct with this. And he's also mentioned Russian Empire, so Russian Empire would bring it into Warsaw, but the Soviet Union wouldn't, because it would be sort of during the Cold War Soviet Union, get the Baltic states and whatnot. So I believe entirely, and I don't think that there's any honest, rational thinker that doesn't think that the timing of this invasion is they thought the West weak because Trump gone. You can hate Trump all you want, but I do believe Putin feared Trump. Feared what he'd do. I don't believe he feared what Biden would do. And I will say this: if it had been the 3-day war, now there would have been maybe an ongoing insurgency. But had they taken Kiev and Kharkov and Mariupol and whatnot in that sort of 3-day war, I don't think that a lot would have happened to, there would have been sanctions, there would have been a lot of, talking at podiums, there would have been a lot of that stuff, but there would not have been this effort to keep Ukraine fighting. Because I don't believe, okay, well, let me continue here. So, I think he saw weakness, and I think he saw the timing is good, and I think he would have been correct had he been able to achieve his tactical and strategical goals in the first 3 days, and then just have sort of a greater, bigger, which again why we would see sanctions, sort of Chechnya type uprising that was being put down. Well, that hasn't happened. He has failed in his goal. He is now trying to consolidate control down here. But what if, and this is the problem. Like I said, Steny Hoyer, the majority leader and the, not the Speaker of the House, that's Nancy Pelosi, but the number 2 guy under her, said we are at war. No, we're not at war. We, the U.S. Ukraine is at war. Russia's at war. We're not. But they say we are. That's the problem. Is the mental thinking of these people. What if Russia consolidates its control? Well, I don't know if it's going to be without nukes. Who knows? But what if Russia consolidates its control, holds the Dnieper line, holds the Donbass, and then goes F you to Ukraine and say you can't cross in Ukraine, and Ukraine cannot, let's just say, Ukraine cannot cross back across the Dnieper, cannot push in. Oh, they could do some partisan ratings, guerrilla type stuff. I'm not doubting that, but can't retake the territory. What happens? Or what happens if they retake the territory and retake Crimea? I don't think they can effectively push out of Ukraine. And so what if Russia doesn't surrender? What happens if neither of these sides, because I do not believe it's going to be capable because Ukraine builds some of their own tanks. Ukraine has an arms industry, sort of like, as Butter was saying, or Pickle, or however I want to call them, China did. They have an arms industry, but it's not enough. It's not big enough to supply at the rate of munitions and, machine gun bullets fired per day, NLAWs fired per day. NLAWs, they make about 3,000 a year. I got that from Lockheed. Their current production is about 3,000 a year. How many have they shot? How many have they given to Ukraine? How many has Ukraine shot already? That's only about 10 rockets a day they're making, if I have my math right. Hi, Martin. Good to have you here. So they're only making about 10 NLAWs a day under current conditions. And Toy Jet's here. Greetings. They may be able to step that up, but out of their own statement a month or so ago, they make about 3,000 a year, 3,000 plus. So about 10 NLAWs a day they make. Well, at peacetime, that's enough to fulfill most of these nations' needs. But a lot of nations given their NLAWs to Ukraine and want to order more to replace them because, hey, they're working great. And Ukraine wants more too. And the U.S. is I'm doing very good, Martin. And U.S. is dumping Well, they started to, but Rand Paul's held up their $40 billion dump into Lockheed Martin and others to produce more NLAWs. And I'm not saying they can't double or triple that number, but they were pretty, this is our max capacity right now is 3,000, 3,000, whatever it was, maybe it's 3,800, I don't know. But it was something like that, Lockheed Martin's statement on the NLAWs from their corporate Twitter account. Now that however much money Ukraine is going to get from the U.S. to buy NLAWs and things, and how much of it is going to go into Hunter somebody's, what Biden, put those two words together, private bank accounts, I don't know, maybe $1 billion or $2 billion. Them Bidens, man, they've only really had government jobs. Look up how much they're worth. Look at how much they get paid in the government. How do they get all that extra money? I wonder. But yeah, so where the money ends up, I don't know. But they're given a lot of they're going to be given a lot of money, and the Ukrainians are going to go to M103s. They're being given Panzerhaubitze 2000s. Hello, Lord Samuel. Well, good to have you here again. So they're being given weapons, and they're being given money to buy more. Well, Lockheed Martin cannot keep up with, and so everybody's making. There's a dog barking out in front of my place here. I don't know. How much surface-to-air and anti-tank missiles can be produced, but Ukraine is going to get plenty of money to buy every one they can possibly buy. So they're being pumped into this war, which will keep them going. And my fear is that the Ukrainians will be able to keep their side going because it's being fed by Western military powers. They may not be strong enough to push, retake Crimea, retake the Donbass. I'm not saying they're not going to have advances. They may, but I'm pretty damn sure they're not going to be able to, even with all that support, drive to Moscow. They might get someplace like Rostov-on-the-Don, but they ain't going to get to whatever you call, I forget what it's called now. Volgograd, I think it's called, Stalingrad. They're not going to get to these places. They're not going to be able to do that. I just don't foresee that as a possibility. So if Russia won't surrender, and if Ukraine won't surrender, I don't think 40... Oh, it's 40 billion, Mark. Hey, 40 million? I'm fine with 40 million. It's 40 billion, if I said million before. It's $40 billion over 2 years. It's over 2 years, mind you, not just the first year. I mean, it's a total of $40 billion over 2 years. Billion with a B, if I mistakenly said before. I don't know. Yeah, inflation. No, that ain't going to help. Now, some of that may be just like Butter was saying about 103s. That may be, some of that may be, oh yeah, we're giving them 103s. That may technically be, we're selling them 103s. And they're going to pay for it with, $4 or $5 billion that we're giving, out of the $40 billion. They may be paying for, we may be paying them to pay us for our weapons. That's in essence what we're doing. Even, the Panzerhaubitze 2000s that they're getting from the Dutch, and I think they're maybe getting some from Germany now. They're getting ammo for those. And those are expensive things. And I know the Paladin version of the M103s are really nice and expensive versions of the artillery pieces. Compared to the old Vietnam versions of them would be much cheaper. So we're dumping in money that will keep Ukraine fighting because I think it was 44 million people in Ukraine at the start of this. I could be wrong in that number. It could be very wrong. I don't know. That's what I remember that they had, but I'm not sure. And so we're dumping in munitions. Russia, according to analysis, including which I trust a little, one of the governments I trust on their analysis is the British Military of Defense updates. I think they're being, I mean, they keep calling it an illegal war, so yes, they have a viewpoint on it, but I think they're generally being right. And their understanding is Russia has used up their stockpile of smart munitions, because at first they were trying to, and I think they mostly were, to target critical infrastructure elements to fighting the war, anti-air defense systems or something, and not just blanket artillery firing into cities or whatever. They were trying to target specific things. The thought is that they've run out of those munitions, and so now they're just going back to World War II. That is the U.S. sort of 155 millimeter howitzer tracked thing that there. If I have that number right, M103. I think that's the right one. A lot of M10 whatever's around in the U.S. system. I may get something wrong there. So it's America's version of the, and it goes back to the Vietnam era, but it's highly upgraded. Hardly recognize it from what it was way back when. So they have a large population that Ukraine has, that's been able to mobilize. Russia has a bigger population that they're able to mobilize. Oh, M109. Thanks, Paul Goodart. I know it's something like that. A6 is the current. Okay, thanks, Paul. Good. Hey, good to get things wrong. Good to see who's chatting with me, or who's watching. So yes. So with both, and Russia is able to build a lot of, and I'm sure they're building more smart munitions at whatever rate they can build them. China is not cutting Russia off from things like semiconductors and other, smart chip elements that they may need. China will sell all that stuff to Russia that it needs to. It is good for China to have Russia in this war. So Russia or China will continue. I don't think China is going to put military assets, Chinese troops, but trade assets, buying Russian oil, yes. Selling Russia microchips, yes. So I don't know that they're going to do too much as in selling weapons, maybe, to Russia. I don't know. But definitely just the trade that the world is cutting off from Russia, China will pick up, I think, and can't do it. Is better. Yeah, the 109, the upgraded 109 is damn good. The Panzerhaubitze is better. I think it's the best. The Swedish truck artillery piece is very good. It's on a truck-based system, which has its advantages, but I also think it has its disadvantages. I would pick I looked at it years ago now. I mean, 5-10 years ago. The Panzerhaubitze in 2000, I think is the best currently available mobile artillery system. It can fire 5 rounds out of its gun at varying trajectories. You can't see my hands describing it through the air, so that they all land at one location at the same time. So normally, like if, World War II, there's a few spotter rounds coming around, and then everybody realizes, oh shit, we're going to be artillery. So everybody jumps into a foxhole, right? Or lays down before all the normal ones, you played War Thunder, whatever. But with the time on target, particularly I think it's like 3 for the M109, but it's 5 for them at certain ranges. That they'll get all 5 rounds up into the air, and they all land simultaneously, like before the first round even lands. So everybody's standing around smoking their cigarettes, thinking everything's fine, and then bam, it just massively hit with artillery. And for maximum impact, and it's one of the best for that. The Swedish thing can do it too, but it's again just a truck. Well, the thing is that if a ceasefire is pressured by the West without Russia's withdrawal, then wars of conquest are de facto allowed. Well, I think there's Alt What If History. I've been recently found a YouTube channel, and he's looking at it. I think that's coming. Two remarkable things have happened. One, Eritrea got its independence, and the Union of African States, no, Organization of African States, not Union, the OAS, recognized it. And then South Sudan got its independence, and the Organization of African States recognized this. This is a tremendous change in African policies. I don't know if you guys realize how dramatic of a change that is and how much that changed the world. They've still not yet recognized, because this is a functionally independent area of Somaliland. Right now, they print their own currency or have it printed for them. Saudi Arabia sort of kind of recognizes them. They have diplomatic relations to some degree, but not official or too official. But nobody's really recognizing this. And unlike Somalia down here, this is not a failed state. British colonialism for the win. But yeah, I think we're going to be seeing more and more of wars of conquest. And of course, we've seen wars of conquest back and forth here with Israel for a long time. So yeah, it's a thing. So now, so how does, the problem is how this plays out. What are we going to be doing 2 years from now? What are we going to be doing 2 years from now? Is Russia still going to be at war with Ukraine? Are they still going to be actively fighting? Because, technically, not war, but technically the U.S., South Korea, and other United Nations are still technically in an armed conflict. It's not a technical war from the U.S. standpoint, but are still in an armed conflict with North Korea. We have a ceasefire line, and of course you remember Trump visiting the little ceasefire complex, or the negotiating complex, and stepped across the line into North Korea to Kim Jong-un's, which is a very remarkable event. He stepped into North Korea, in North Korea's, without any security. There were no U.S. Secret Service with him. So he left not just left, the United States, he left Western world and entered Korea without Secret Service protection. That is a tremendous thing. So you have that's on there. And of course, Japan, I gather, had a ceasefire with Russia. But the ceasefire is over with Russia, and so Japan is now again at war with Russia. You guys realize this now, everybody. Japan is at war with Russia. To the best of my knowledge, there has not yet been a shot fired, but Japan is now at war with Russia because I forget who pulled out of, whether it was Japan or I think it was Russia that pulled out of the peace talks or this whatever negotiations, and it's sort of over who controls this island. Currently, it's all controlled by Russia. And I don't know if it's dealing with any of these things, but Japan is now at open hostilities, technically at war. A state of war exists between the nation of Japan and the nation of Russia at this moment. Again, no one is shooting at each other, but they are at war. Not just broken off diplomatic relations. They are at war. Been just following the news today about Finland's NATO decision. Yep, that's going to be very interesting. And so, miscalculation, they were worried about, Putin's worried about NATO expansion into Ukraine. Now you've got NATO expansion into Sweden and Finland. Is all but a done deal. My understanding as of now, Russia's cutting off electricity that had been generated inside of Russia and going across into Finland. That has been shut down. I don't know if it has actually happened yet, but my understanding it was going to be happening today. Russia is digging itself into the hole that Japan was digging itself into over China. And worst case scenario, we've got global thermonuclear war on the thing. We've never had a we've never had thermonuclear war. We've just had sort of conventional nuclear war. Thermonuclear war is beyond the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. Those were just conventional nukes. The thermonuclear war we've never done yet. No one's ever fired one of those things in anger. We just test fired them a few times. Yes, we can do global thermonuclear war. That's the worst case scenario. Well, no. Russia's cutting off power to Finland. Supposedly, because of the banking systems, the cutting off, some technical reason, Finland isn't going to be able to pay for the power that's being generated just basically cutting the power that was going along the power lines from Russia into Finland. So they're cutting off that. So I don't know how much that's going to have been. Okay, yes, have been cut. It was around 10% in the last few weeks of Finnish total consumption. Okay, yeah, but still 10%, that's a thing. And all these people that are, realize much, I don't know the percentage, I'm not saying it's like more than half, but a big chunk of the world's turbines for wind power are made in China, and a big chunk of the world's solar cells for solar panels are made in China. Okay, a big chunk. Now I don't know whether that's 30% or 70%. I don't have the good numbers there, but it is a big chunk. I don't know that in solar isn't going to work for these people. Sorry. Wind turbines might, but might not. So they need to look for an alternative source of power. Green power is not going to be the way of the future, people. Germany's gotten rid of all of its nuclear power plants. France is building more nuclear power plants, is my understanding. Green power will not do it, people. Not maintain an industrialized society. Green power is a nice addition, sometimes really good in that you can, in a remote area, slap down a few windmills where there's a good constant wind and put up there and create some nice local power, or in some more sunny environments, again, like on a camper, put a solar panel. In a remote part of Egypt or something, create a few solar power plants. Now maybe solar will get better, but wind will never get really better than it is. I mean, I'm not saying you won't technically get something that generates a little better power, but it's only going to be so good. There's a peak maximum wind generation capability. So, and, wind turbines need a lot of oil to keep them lubricated. They need a lot of maintenance. And if you're dumping them in parts of the world where they don't have the technical abilities to maintain them, they don't have the infrastructure to maintain them, meaning they're sort of parachuted in by either government or NGOs, non-government organizations, and here are some wind turbines for you, Zambia. Yay, great. 10 years from now, oh, well, half of them aren't working. Well, Zambia, why didn't you keep those wind turbines working? We don't know how. And so green energy is not going to cut it, people. It is not going to cut it. It is a nice additive. It is not the way of the future, and I think this is showing this up. Okay, what else? They expect the gas might be next. Government says that households will have gas, but industries might have a hard time ahead. You see, that's Virgintinus. Yeah, that is. Virginitas. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that, but yeah, that's the thing is okay, keep the gas on for the gas stoves or the gas heaters in homes, and your industrialization goes out. We got reactor online last month, so we're okay. Okay, good. You got some reactors. Even the Dutch want to build one more nuclear reactor. Yeah, okay. See, that's it. Now, nuclear power plants are, because we've more or less solved the proper storage of radioactive materials. So they are a green energy to a significant degree. Yeah, they do have the, radioactive waste that needs to be managed, but beyond that, they're doing pretty good. So, that's fine if you're going to do that. You just got to build it right. Hello, Roar Barbar Sloth. I guess that's it. That's awesome. Been keeping an eye out for that for years. Hopefully we'll see more Gen 3.5 reactors popping up now. Yeah, and we have, of course, the terrible reactor in a shed of whatever, I always blank on names for some reason. I would say of here. What's the reactor's name that went melted down? Unique nuclear power plant. Indeed, glad to see it finally up and running. Most expensive construction was a nightmare. I blank on names. I don't know. The reactor that melted down here, that was a particularly bad one. And so yeah, some older Chernobyl. That's it. Thank you, Martin. Yeah, Chernobyl. That was a reactor in a shed. I think one of the reactors is still functioning, isn't it? Still getting power from it. I'm not sure, but so yeah, some of them should be shut down, and modern ones. But like Germany, to the best of my knowledge, was yes. Now everybody is on Chernobyl. Good. Germany shutting down its power, nuclear power plants, which maybe is a good idea for the ones that they had, but to my knowledge, they didn't have in place a plan to replace them with other nuclear power plants. Okay, so you see how Japan and China in the 1930s and very early 1940s is becoming more similar to Russia and Ukraine. And so please, and I know I'm talking to almost 20 people right now, and there's going to be for this episode to watch it a few hundred more maybe. I wish more people would look at the parallels. Look at the like I say, the worst case is just global thermonuclear war. Not even just a World War III without nukes or something, or World War III with a few conventional nukes, or those are all possibilities too. And of course there could just be the NATO versus Russia war with or without nukes. May not include China and India and Japan and everywhere else, but hey, like I say, Japan's already at war with Russia. Nobody's shooting anybody yet, but they're at war. So yeah, it can spiral out to be the worst thing humanity's ever seen. Literally the worst thing humanity's ever seen. And we have politicians, particularly some American ones, particularly old ones, who are doddering and who are using language like they were from the 90s and dealing with Saddam Hussein somewhere or somebody like that, and talking about Putin, and that Putin's the worst person on the fucking planet ever being. Hell no, he ain't. He's a bad guy. I'm not trying to say he's not a bad guy. I'm no Putin apologist. Never been a fan of Putin, but he ain't. He ain't Hitler. Okay, he ain't Hitler. He's a bad guy, most assuredly. This is no Putin's good. No, Putin is bad. Putin is bad. It's the thing. Everyone was like, you go first. Now that has been built. The next one, okay, half as bad to build. Yeah, I know getting technology to work and function, that'll be good. New technology. People are already saying the small modular could be the future. So this plant might already be old-fashioned. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a nuclear scientist, obviously. So I know almost nothing about. I get the basic concept of heating up water running it, turning it into steam, you know, with you know, you know, with the radioactive response, heating up water, turning it into steam, and to turn turbines is how you know, a nuclear reactor works. Beyond that, you've lost me. It's about all the knowledge I know about how nuclear power plants work, big or small. But yeah, it's still just back to a sort of a steam power plant in fact. But yeah, and so this is something that everybody needs to watch. And I do, you know, I have contacts in Ukraine and do have contacts in Russia. Nothing like in government or anything, just people there that I talk to periodically to try to get a sense of what's going on. But this is scary to me, people. This is scary. Okay, we're going to end this episode, not the live stream, everybody, but just this episode. I want to thank you all for watching. If you're still around, please hit the like button. Everybody who's live right now on YouTube can hit that like button. And subscribe if you're new here. Thanks, everyone.